In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, welcome to another Friday, another session of Finding God. Currently, we are on chapter 14 of the Quran. There's 100 left to go. So bear with me as the journey of another 2 years unfolds in front of your eyes. We'll get to the Bible and the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Tipitaka, the Torah. We'll get to all of that. It is minus 21 in Montreal today, and tomorrow it is said that it will be around minus 35, minus 37. So, therefore, you can see the layers and everything. And reading this or reading examples of other religious texts reminds you how old this world is. And when I think of even going outside the house, I think of trials and tribulations, and reading these things always puts it in context. So today we're going to be covering Surah Al-Adiyat, which is chapter 14 in terms of revelation, but in terms of arrangement, it is the 100th chapter, and it's very small. It's longer than what we discussed last week, but it's not very long. And it translates to the racing horses, the war horses, those that run, words of order. That's what it translates to. And I should just put this here. We've known God so far to explain certain points through examples and explain certain ideas through exaggeration, or if exaggeration is not the correct word, then an emphasis on extreme conditions to explain something. So he would give the example of hellfire to tie it to the context of sin or doing good deeds and so forth. So there's a lot of this which happens in the Quran, but also in all other books. So if you read the Bible, which I'm feeling that maybe I should start reading now as opposed to wait for the Quran to finish and then get on the Bible. But we'll get to that later because I haven't read the Bible in as much detail. But if you read the Bible, or if you read texts from Hinduism, or if you read the Torah, or if you read anything that constitutes a religious text, you will see this comparison of metaphor, you will see this comparison of scales, of congruence all the time. It's just a rhetorical, literary device which is used. So it's not the longest chapter, so today will not be a long video. It's going to be a bit brief, but let me just read the translation and then we can meditate on it together. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. By the steeds that run, or by the horses that run with panting. So, when they're running off that level, of that physical requirement, striking sparks of fire by their hooves. So this is a thought that they're running their war horses, and they're running with so much speed and so much fire and gusto that the clashing hooves are creating sparks of fire. And raise the dust and clouds the while. And scouring to the raid at dawn, so time of day, and raise the dust in clouds the while, and penetrating forthwith as one into the midst of the foe. So you're understanding, it's describing the situation or circumstance of war. That's what it's describing right now. But we know so far, it's week 14, we know so far that in the Quran and also in other religious texts, what applies to a literal condition can also be taken metaphorically or figuratively. So while it's explaining a horse running in war and fire coming out and so forth, we can always think of it in a different context. Verily, man is ungrateful to his Lord. And here, when they refer to man, they refer to some belief. Now, one may argue that does that constitute all people of faith, which means the only one we are not including are those who don't believe in any faith or any God. It's hard to say, really. And people of varying religious affinity or religious intensity will give you different answers. Somebody who is very religious but also very orthodox in Islam might say, no, the disbeliever means all those who are not Muslims. Someone of a similar inclination might even go further to say, which is something I don't agree with, that no, only people who believe in the Islam that I believe in are the believers. So they will say, if they are the Sunni, of the Sunni, shall I say, subsection, they will say, no, the Shias are not counted, or the Ahmadis are not counted, or the Zaydis, or so many divisions in Islam, they're not counted. If it's a Hanafi, or if it's a Salafi, which you find in the Middle East, they might have a different point of view. Oh no, this is a believer and this is not a believer. I don't go down that route. I say anybody who believes in God or divine forces is a believer. What we name God, how we follow God, is different and distinct. And even though, as a Muslim, I have been taught, we have all been taught, whoever amongst us is a Muslim, that this is the perfect religion, this is the best religion, I don't go down that route. While as far as I'm concerned, Islam is beautiful. Islam solves all the riddles of my life, but I do not compare it to anything else. That's me. And I won't even go down that road because I don't see any point in doing so. Some scholars do, and I'm not a scholar. Some people do, and I'm not one of those people. My internet connection is screwing up a bit, so I'll just keep going. But as far as I'm concerned, believers are those who believe in God. Then you may argue whether it's the one true God, or is it the 33 million gods of Hinduism, or is it the Egyptian pantheon, or the Greek pantheon, or the Roman one. You can always discuss this. But I start by separating the believers in any faith from the believers of nothing, or the disbelievers of all faith. That's where I draw the line. But in this context, it could mean so many things. That's why I elaborated the point. Verily, man is ungrateful to his Lord, and to that he bears witness by his deeds. What does that mean? If you're ungrateful to your Lord, you'll end up conducting deeds that do not celebrate, venerate your Lord, and to show who you are. Fair enough. That's a clear logic. So it means that man is ungrateful, the disbelieving man, and he will do deeds to prove that he's ungrateful, that he doesn't value what we've given him. And to that he bears witness. And verily he is violent in the love of wealth. In the love of wealth, he is violent. I find this to be very interesting. Have you noticed how many times in the Quran the topic of wealth is repeated? I don't know why that is. Here's what I think. One reason could be wealth is constantly repeated in the Quran because at the time, not unlike today, it was one of the most precious commodities a human being could have. That's one reason. Another reason could be that Islam or Muhammad or the God of Islam are obsessed with wealth and saving and securing and power. Fair enough. If that's a perspective and you can make an argument, I'll have a conversation with you. I'm just putting it out there that could be one other opinion. Another perspective could be to explain why wealth is not important, or why the accumulation of wealth is not important, and why being violent in love of wealth is not important. And here we start treading into a lot of Buddhism or maybe Christianity, or maybe parts of Hinduism, and Islam. Islam here, Islam does not advocate for asceticism like some other religions may do. It doesn't advocate for starving yourself for weeks and weeks to find spirituality. It doesn't do any of that. But what it does do is that it mentions wealth again and again at different points of time, different contexts. So here it says, verily he is violent in the love of wealth. Who is he? He is the person who is ungrateful to his God, and he is a disbeliever. Knows he not that when the contents of the graves are poured forth, which means all of mankind is resurrected. I just have to stop here and explain how wonderful and terrifying this poetry is. Knows he not that when the contents of the grave are poured out? This is a glass. If you fill it with water, you can pour the water out. We all know this to be true. I have never in my life thought of a grave as a vessel. You pour things out of a vessel. You don't pour things out of a surface. You don't pour things out of an interface. You pour things out of a vessel. The grave is a vessel. Isn't it interesting? I've never thought of it that way. It's almost like a cocoon. And if anyone has seen The Matrix, you know where all the human beings are. They're in the small cocoons and they're being kept and harvested for energy. Fair enough. That's The Matrix. But imagine the grave being that sort of a cocoon. It's a vessel. When the contents of the graves are poured forth, that is when mankind is resurrected. I just have to say, the imagery and the metaphor is incredible. It's incredible because I never looked at the grave that way. You see what I mean? We imagine it is under the ground. We dig the ground, put the human, cover it with the earth that was dug out, and that's the grave. That's done. In this metaphor, it means something that is holding the content that is inside. It is not something that is buried under, it is something that is holding. That changes how we look at graves. That changes our understanding, because now we can't say that their graves, the land and man is just buried under the land. We can't say that. It's almost as if man is engulfed in the protection of this land, and even when he deteriorates, he decomposes and becomes one with the land, a perspective you may share with the Native Americans of North America. You become one with the land again, and some other religions too. But Islam is this, and that is why whenever we see tombs in Islam that are being venerated and celebrated and respected, I have a strong critique of it. This is not what the religion is about. The religion is not about venerating the dead. The religion is about nothingness. You go into a cocoon in the earth and you're part of the earth now until the day of resurrection, when the contents of the grave will be poured out and you will be resurrected. Isn't that incredible? I've read this chapter in Arabic maybe 1,000 times, but I've never read the translation in this manner. I'm actually going through some sort of a deeper understanding while I'm live on all these media channels. Knows he not that when the contents of the graves are poured out, and that which is in the breasts of men shall be made known? Now, if you remember, I think it was last week or the week before when we were discussing the importance of the breast. And the breast in our common lexicon, speaks to the parts on a woman's body. But we discussed in detail last week that breast means all of this, and breast also means the heart. So when you talk about breast, you talk about heart, especially when it comes to the Quran. All that which is in the breasts of men shall be made known. Now, this means, this is also another metaphor. Think about it. The grave, this is the grave. The grave is being emptied. All the contents are being poured out. But there is another vessel which is going to be made empty, and that is the breast. That is the heart. So the grave is being emptied on the days of resurrection, and so are the hearts. Look at the imagery and the scale. The grave is underground. The heart is under skin, bone, and muscle. Can you see the congruence between the world and the human being? This talks about, this is why I say it starts with horses. Something as simple as horses running and hooves and fire coming out of their hooves. And all of a sudden it's about man and the disbeliever and the right and the wrong and buried in the heart. Do you see what I mean? The earth and the man as metaphor. Do you see how wonderful that is? Verily that day, which is the day of resurrection, the Lord will be well acquainted with them as to their deeds and will reward them for their deeds. Now this is an underlying theme in not only Islam but in most religions about teaching through reprimand, teaching through reward. We already know that. This is it. This is all there is to this chapter. And I urge you to look at the Quran in this manner of scales and dimensions and temporality, because I've read this chapter, as I told you, over 1,000 times in Arabic, maybe over 10,000 times even. It's very short. But when you look at it now, the grave and the breast and the day of resurrection and the horses of war, all of them come together. I find that to be very interesting. One can definitely construct a narrative here, or write a story even, or construct a poem which pays homage to this poem that God has written, because the Quran is poetry, if nothing else. But you see the point here. The vessel is important. The grave is a vessel. The human heart is a vessel. Man, or human, and earth can be understood to be the same. Because on the day of judgment, all the hearts of the earth are going to open, and the human heart as well. Incidentally, earth and heart come together to make hearth, which is also a very, very, very important part of community and society, where fires are lit, stories are told, and the center of the home is. And I'd love for you to meditate on this a bit further. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you believe, this is an interesting book. If I tell you that it is one of the greatest books ever written, if not the greatest, you would say I'm biased. And fair enough. I am biased. I'm a Muslim. Of course I am biased to say that this is a fantastically written book, probably the best ever written. I am biased as a Muslim. You may argue that the Bible is also one of them. And if it's non-religious, I would try to convince you that it's the Fountainhead, which doesn't fit with maybe 80-90%, but I still think it is one of the greatest books ever written. Try to read it in the manner that I'm trying to read it here as a layperson. This is a layperson's reading. I am going through this catharsis with you. I'm going to mull over this in a lot of detail. The grave is a vessel, and the grave has a metaphorical equivalent or affiliation with the human heart, and which means that the human being and the earth have metaphorical affiliations. I find that to be very exciting. Thank you so much for joining me today. 20 minutes have flown by. I didn't even realize. I'm trying a new setup. I'm sitting at my table as opposed to sitting all the way away from it. And hopefully I'll try to do my sessions from here. Next week is the shortest chapter of the Quran called Surah Kawthar, or Kawthar, if you want to correct the pronunciation. And it's just three. And there's a wonderful story associated with it. I don't know if it's true or not, but we'll talk about it next week. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful weekend and enjoy the winter, and see you